Every great civilization in history believed it was permanent. Rome believed it would last forever. The British Empire believed the sun would never set on it. Right now, in 2026, millions of people are watching the most powerful nation in modern history begin to fracture, and they cannot explain why. In 1377, a man who had survived plague, war, and the collapse of 3 different governments sat down in a mountain fortress in Algeria, and he wrote the answer. His name was Ibn Khaldun. He had figured out exactly why civilizations rise, exactly why they fall, and exactly what comes next. He was 700 years ahead of every historian, sociologist, and political scientist who came after him. Almost nobody in the Western world has heard of his name. This is his story, and it may be the most important thing you watch this year. Abdelrahman ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis in 1332, into one of the most turbulent periods in human history. He was a child when the Black Death arrived in North Africa. By the time he was 15, the plague had killed 1/3 of the known world, including both of his parents. He was raised in the ruins of what had been. By the time he was 30, he had served 3 different rulers, been imprisoned by a 4th, and watched 2 governments he had given his loyalty to collapse without warning. Most men would have given up on understanding the world. Ibn Khaldun became obsessed with it because he kept asking the same question, the question that every event in his life kept raising. Why do great civilizations collapse? In 1375, exhausted by decades of political intrigue, he accepted an invitation to retreat to a remote fortress in the mountains of what is now western Algeria, a place called Ibn Salama. He arrived with almost nothing, no court obligations, no political survival to manage, just silence, a lifetime of observation, and one question. He stayed for 3.5 years, and when he emerged, he had written the Muqaddimah, an introduction to his history of the world that would later be described by the 20th century historian Arnold Toynbee as undoubtedly the greatest work of its kind that has ever yet been created by any mind in any time or place. So, what did he discover? Ibn Khaldun built his entire theory around a single concept. He called it Asabiyyah. There is no perfect English translation. It means something like collective identity, group cohesion, the feeling that we are in this together and that I would sacrifice everything for you and you for me. Think about what that feels like in practice. A team of people building something from nothing, working 18-hour days because they believe in each other. A community pulling together after a disaster. Strangers becoming family overnight. A country at war, unified by a shared sense of purpose stronger than any individual self-interest. That bond, that willingness to put the collective above the individual, that is Asabiyyah. And according to Ibn Khaldun, it is the single most powerful force in all of human history. Here is how the cycle works. Great civilizations do not begin in cities. They begin at the margins, in deserts, mountains, and difficult places where life demands cooperation, where you either trust the people beside you completely or you die. The people who live there develop an extraordinary Asabiyyah because they have no other choice. That solidarity becomes power. A tribe with strong enough Asabiyyah can defeat armies 3 times its size, and overthrow rulers who, on paper, hold every advantage, because soldiers fight harder when they believe in something, when they trust the man beside them, when they feel, not just think, that what they are defending matters. Ibn Khaldun noticed something that every other historian had missed. The very things that great civilizations produce, wealth, comfort, luxury, safety, begin to destroy the thing that created them, the 3rd generation, the grandchildren of the founders. They inherit the wealth, but not the struggle that built it. They grow up comfortable, individualistic, more interested in competing with each other than in protecting the whole. The Asabiyyah weakens. The ruling class grows isolated, corrupt, self-serving. The people at the top stop trusting each other. Factions form. Everyone fights for a larger share of a pie that is slowly shrinking. And at the margins, exactly as the original tribe had once risen from the margins, a new group appears. Hungrier, leaner, more united, with the Asabiyyah that the empire has lost. Ibn Khaldun calculated that this full cycle, rise, peak, decline, collapse, takes approximately 3 to 4 generations, around 120 years, and he stated with the confidence of a man who had tested the theory against centuries of history that it applies to, every civilization without exception. Let us test it. Rome. In its early centuries, the Roman Republic had extraordinary Asabiyyah. Citizens served in the army. Senators fought alongside ordinary soldiers. The shared identity of being Roman, what it demanded, what it required, what it meant was fierce and genuine. That solidarity built an empire stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia. Then the wealth came. Conquered territories brought slaves, gold, and grain. The Roman citizen no longer needed to fight or work. The political class fractured into competing factions. Civil wars tore the republic apart as individuals fought for personal power rather than collective strength. By the late empire, the Roman legions were composed largely of the very people Rome had conquered. Not because Rome was generous, because Romans had lost the will to defend it. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. Rome's history, the pattern matched as Ibn Khaldun's theorized. Now the British Empire. At its peak in the early 20th century, Britain controlled roughly a quarter of the world's land surface. That empire was built on something specific, a collective will and shared identity that could mobilize an entire society. 2 world wars later, that solidarity was spent. The people who had survived the trenches and the Blitz had given everything. The generations that followed inherited a nation exhausted by sacrifice, hollowed by loss. The empire dissolved, not because Britain was militarily defeated, because the Asabiyyah that had built it was gone. Ibn Khaldun wrote this pattern in 1377. He was describing something that would not complete its cycle in British history for another 5 centuries. The pattern held. Now, here is the question Ibn Khaldun would ask if he were alive today. Where is the Asabiyyah? Look at the Western world in 2026. Political polarization at levels not seen since the 1930s. A collapse of shared cultural identity so severe that people in the same country can no longer agree on basic facts, let alone shared purpose. Institutions that citizens have stopped trusting. Leaders who serve factions, not nations. A generation of young people who feel no ownership in the society they have inherited. Ibn Khaldun had a specific term for this phase. He called it the stage of senility, the point at which a civilization has lost the internal cohesion that built it, but has not yet been replaced by anything new. And he said you can always recognize this stage by a single symptom. The ruling class becomes more concerned with maintaining its own position than with the strength of the whole. He was writing about 14th century North Africa. But consider it again in the context of today's world. Now this is the part that most people miss about Ibn Khaldun. He was not a pessimist. He did not write the Muqaddimah as a prophecy of doom. He wrote it as a map. Because if you can see the cycle, if you understand exactly where you are within it, you are not trapped by it. He was explicit about one thing. Civilizations do not fall because of external enemies. External enemies are merely the final blow to something already hollow from within. They fall from the inside. The Asabiyyah breaks down first, then everything follows. Which means, if enough people can see it happening, the pattern can be interrupted. But only by rebuilding the one thing that is actually being lost. Not military power, not economic growth, not political victory. Asabiyyah, a thing that makes people believe they are part of something larger than themselves. Ibn Khaldun died in Cairo in 1406 at the age of 74. He had lived through the Black Death, collapsed governments, imprisonment, exile, and the death of nearly everyone he loved. And yet what he left behind was not bitterness or despair. It was understanding. For centuries after his death, his work was largely unknown in the Western world. It would take until the 20th century for scholars to finally recognize what he had done. He had invented sociology 3 centuries before Auguste Comte. He had developed the first serious theory of economics 4 centuries before Adam Smith. He had created historiography as a science, treating human history not as a collection of stories, but as a system governed by discoverable laws. He had done all of it in 3.5 years. Alone in a mountain fortress with nothing but time, silence, and a question. The question he was asking is the same question every generation eventually has to face. What holds us together, and what happens when we forget the answer? If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to our channel for more videos about how our history can shape the future that we choose to live.